the stench hit first. Father Healy had grown used to rot, human, spiritual, both. But this was something else. It was a stench of wet rust and burnt copper, of blood boiled in a cauldron and left to fester under the sun. It crawled into his nostrils and stayed there like it had claws. The house was ancient stone, walls sweating from the heat and the pressure of something unseen. It sat alone on a hill like a wound on the skin of the earth. The girl's father met Healy at the door, eyes rimmed with red, beard uneven from days of neglect. His hand clutched a crucifix so hard the metal had bitten into his palm. He didn't speak. He just pointed. Inside, the house was eerily silent. No clocks ticking, no pipes creaking, no birds. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place. The bedroom was on the second floor, door already ajar. 4 nuns stood outside, heads bowed, murmuring prayers in a continuous loop that sounded more like a dirge than devotion. One of them met Healy's gaze as he passed. Her eyes were hollow. She had been here too long. Healy stepped inside the room and felt the temperature drop instantly. The air was thick, like syrup, like smoke, like breath exhaled from the lungs of corpse. The girl, Kiara, was tied to a rusted bed frame with leather straps that once belonged to a mule. Her wrists were torn raw from struggling. Her head lolled to the side. She looked up at him and smiled. "You're late," she rasped. The voice didn't belong in a human throat. It was wet, gurgling, and layered. The whites of her eyes were gone, replaced by a yellowed film, like old parchment strepped over orbs of tar. 2 men stood on either side of the bed, local farmhands brought in for muscle. Their faces were pale, mouths tight with the kind of tension that comes from standing too close to a thing you can't understand. One held a baseball bat. The other gripped a thick belt like a leash. The walls of the room were covered in scratches, deep gouges that had stripped paint, plaster, and even wood. Symbols Father Healy didn't recognize. He set his case down on the bedside table and opened it. Holy water, crucifix, candle stubs, salt, blessed cloth. Relics of a war no one else believed in. Kiara's breathing grew louder. Healy looked at her and saw her chest rising and falling like something was moving inside of her, pushing against her ribs from within. Her skin bulged in odd places, beneath the collarbone, under the sternum, as if her organs were shifting under duress. He uncapped the bottle of holy water. She screamed, not in pain, but in mockery. The sound was high-pitched, inhuman, echoing with something that bent the walls inward. One of the men flinched. The other closed his eyes and grit his teeth. "I've met you before. 30 miles north. A boy, 9 years old. You broke his spine with a prayer and called it mercy." Healy's hand tightened around the bottle. She always knew things. They always knew things. She jerked against the restraint so violently the bed shifted. The frame groaned. The farmhand with the bat moved to steady it, but she turned her head and spat at him. Blood. 3 nails came out. Blackened, bent, and rusted. They shot from her mouth and clattered against the wall behind them. Healy stepped forward and raised the crucifix and began. Kiara screamed again, this time in his voice. Not just mimicking, it was exact. The same cadence, the same weary edge. It repeated a prayer he'd said in secret as a child, word for word. "Save me, Lord, I'm afraid to die. I'm afraid you won't be there." Healy's hand shook just a little. Then the bed lifted. It didn't jump, it didn't bounce, it rose. Smoothly, effortlessly, metal and all. The girl hovered 3 feet off the ground, eyes wide open now, mouth stretched into a hideous grin that split her lips and tore the corners of her mouth into bloody cracks. Her jaw unhinged with a dry pop, and she began to chant in a tongue he didn't understand. The walls bled. Not metaphorically. Thick, dark streams ran down from the ceiling corners, dripping onto the floor with a sickening slap. The crucifix on the wall turned upside down without a sound. One of the nuns outside the door collapsed. The others had picked up her prayer without missing a beat. Father Healy circled the bed, arms raised, voice growing louder. Kiara's body twisted unnaturally. Her spine arched, joints cracking. Her legs bent backward at the knees and her feet scraped the ceiling. She began to climb the air, dragging herself up an invisible wall. The bed crashed down. Healy shouted now. Shouted with fury, with exhaustion, with years of this never-ending battle grinding down his soul. His voice cracked. The air rippled and the candle flames guttered out, then flared blue. Kiara stopped moving. For a long moment there was silence. No breathing. No sound from outside. Even the blood on the walls paused mid-drip. She looked up at him. "I see you," she said. Her voice was small and human, a child's voice. "I see what's inside you. You think you're clean, but you're a gate." Healy stepped forward and pressed the crucifix to her forehead. Her skin sizzled and she didn't scream, she laughed. Then the room exploded in violence. The bed bucked, her body thrashed. Her mouth opened and something came out. Not a scream, not a voice. A sound like 1,000 rats dying underwater. Her skin turned dark around the eyes, bruises spreading like rot. The walls cracked. The lamp burst and the candlelight turned black. The farmhands tried to hold her. One was thrown across the room, smashing into a dresser so hard it shattered. The other gripped her arm until she bit into his hand and tore off 3 fingers. Blood sprayed, and Father Healy didn't stop. He shouted. He threw water. He pressed his hands to her chest and screamed for the evil to leave. His own voice sounded far away now, like it was echoing through a tunnel. Kiara thrashed once more, then arched backward with a terrible scream that shattered the window. The air turned cold. Frost crept up the walls and her body convulsed and then went still. She dropped. The straps held her limp frame to the bed. Her mouth hung open, blood pooled around her neck, but her eyes were clear again. She sobbed. Father Healy stood still, breathing hard. His arms shook. Sweat poured down his neck. One of the farmhands was moaning on the ground. The other was unconscious, blood pooling around his crushed skull. The door creaked open. One of the nuns stepped inside, knelt beside Kiara, and whispered a prayer into her ear. Kiara clung to her like a drowning child. Healy stepped away. His chest ached. His legs felt numb. The crucifix in his hand was bent. He left the room without a word. The girl was free. For now. But something about this one stuck with him. The words she'd spoken, the way she'd spoken. In that final phrase, "You're a gate." He tried to shake it off. Outside, dusk was settling in over the hills. The sky looked sickly. Healy walked into the olive grove behind the house and collapsed to his knees in the dirt. The soil was warm and it smelled like iron. The sun was low by the time Father Healy left the olive grove. His knees cracked as he stood and the backs of his thighs ached. He moved like a man twice his age. This exorcism had taken more out of him than usual. No surprise. Every year they were getting worse. Every year the gap between human and monster narrowed. He walked back toward the house, squinting against the sickly glow of the horizon. Kiara's family was inside, crying softly behind closed doors. The girl herself had been sedated and moved to a convent for care. The farmhands were gone, one to a hospital, the other to a morgue. A nun tried to thank him, but he waved her off and made for his car. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time before starting the engine. His hands trembled. His neck was soaked with sweat. He stared at his phone, expecting nothing and wanting less. But it was already buzzing. Unknown number, Vatican City. He considered ignoring it, but he didn't. "Father Healy," a voice on the line said, calm, even, unfamiliar. "His Holiness requests your presence in Rome, immediately." There was no explanation. There never was. The line clicked dead before he could respond. He sat there for another minute, then opened the glove box. Inside was a flask, a rosary, and a small photograph of younger Father Healy holding a child, his godson, years before the boy had taken his own life in a church basement. He pushed it aside and grabbed the flask. One long drink, then another. Then he started the car. He arrived in Vatican City just before dusk. A young priest was waiting at the gate and looked barely old enough to shave. His collar was stiff. His shoes were polished. Healy could smell the brand new fabric of his cassock. "Father Healy, we're honored," the voice said too loudly. "His Holiness appreciates your success in Campania. The girl, Chiara, she's stable, yes?" Healy said nothing. He adjusted the strap on his duffel bag and walked past. The halls of the Vatican felt more like a museum than ever. Gold leaf, sacred marble, stained glass washed in the early evening light. They put him in a guest room. High ceilings, crucifixes, a Bible on the nightstand untouched. He took a shower, dressed in a fresh robe, and waited. A knock came just after midnight. Another priest. Older, sterner, eyes like old glass. "His Holiness will see you now." The papal chamber was dim, lit by candles instead of fluorescence. The Pope sat not like a man on a throne, but in a simple wooden chair. He looked tired, old in a way that felt real, like a man who'd seen things that couldn't be buried beneath ritual. "Father Healy," the Pope said. Healy knelt. "Rise, sit, please." Healy did. "You saved a life this week, and perhaps a soul. That's no small thing." Healy didn't speak. "You've served the church well. 30 years, hundreds of exorcisms, survivors, documents, sacrifices. Your name is spoken with respect in places most people will never see." Still, Healy said nothing. The Pope studied him. Then, with a voice like someone reaching deep into their own shame, he said, "But you and I both know this war is no longer about the soul, Father. It hasn't been for a long time." Healy met his eyes. "There are places where evil isn't simply an intruder. It's an architecture, a design. And in those places we no longer fight to save the person. We fight to delay what comes through them. We'd like your help with one such case." There it was. Healy nodded once. The Pope slid a folder across the table. It was old, bound in leather. The pages inside were thin and yellowed, like they might tear if breathed on wrong. Name: Alessandro Volpe, 46. Condition: possessed for 29 years. Current status: containment. No exorcism attempted since 1999. Purpose: maintain bindings. Seal continuance. Do not engage entity. There was a note at the bottom, a handwritten scrawl in black ink. He remembers the garden. Healy closed the folder. "Where?" The Pope hesitated. Then, outside Sicily, a small town. You'll find a priest there, Gianni. He knows the way. I'll fill you in on the details. The next morning, Healy stood on the Vatican runway, waiting for a transport to Sicily. He held the folder in one hand and his rosary in the other. The sky overhead had turned pale, chemical yellow. Planes cut through the clouds like scalpels. He didn't feel dread. He didn't feel anything at all. He arrived shortly after. The town looked like time had forgotten it. It was a small, sun-baked town and too quiet. Terracotta roofs bled into the hillsides. Old women watched from behind shutters. Children didn't play in the streets. Healy parked his rental car outside the church, a squat, weathered building made of black stone. The door creaked when he pushed it open. Inside, the air was dead and dry. The altar looked unused. The pews were dusty. Candles melted in their holders, their wicks long since drowned. A man emerged from the shadows behind the pulpit. Late 30s, face lean and tired, eyes sharp. "Father Healy," he said. "Father Gianni," Healy replied. They stared at each other in the silence that followed. Then Gianni stepped down from the altar and offered a hand. "You're the one they sent this year?" Healy didn't answer. He had a tendency to do that. Gianni smiled faintly. "Every year they send someone new. Never the same face twice and none of them stay." "I won't be staying either." "You're here for Alessandro, then?" Healy opened his mouth, but Gianni cut him off. "For the bindings, yes?" "Yes, I am." Something passed through Gianni's expression. Relief, maybe, or resignation? He nodded. "We'll begin in the morning. You can rest in the rectory. I'll prepare the journal." Healy raised an eyebrow. "We keep records. Not official ones. The church doesn't want anything written down, but some of us, we need to understand what we're sealing. Come. You'll want to read it before you see him." The guest room was small. A cot, a cross, a wooden desk. No windows, no mirror. Gianni returned an hour later with the journal. Leather-bound, edges frayed, smelled of mildew and ash. Healy opened it slowly. The first page was dated 1997. The handwriting was cramped and erratic. "We found him in the Valley of Bones. He had no pulse, his eyes were open, and he smiled at us. They said it was a possession, but it wasn't. It was a door. The boy had become a door." Each page painted the same picture. The entity within Alessandro was not a demon. It didn't tempt or scream or beg. It didn't blaspheme. It waited. Inside him was a thing that had no name. Not because it was unknowable, but because naming it would give it form, and that would be the first crack in the skin of the world. Others had tried exorcism. None had lived. One tore his own eyes out. Another walked into the ocean and never came back. The bindings were created from ancient texts buried beneath the Vatican. The priests learned very quickly that whatever was in Alessandro should never be allowed out of Alessandro. Healy read until the candle burned low. Then he closed the book, placed it on the desk, and sat in the dark for a very long time. He didn't sleep. Father Healy didn't see another soul until morning. The town held its breath until it was waiting for something to pass it over. The streets were clean. No birds, no dogs. No sound except the occasional whisper of dry wind through the alleyways. He wandered early, unable to sleep, trying to feel the pulse of the place. Shutters closed as he passed. A child peeked around a corner but ducked out of sight the moment Healy's eyes met theirs. He passed a well in the center of the village. Rope coiled tightly around the crank. The church rose at the far edge of the village like a scar from some ancient wound. Black stone, Gothic arches warped by centuries of sun. At some point, someone had tried to paint over the age, Whitewash still clung in flakes to the upper walls, but the structure rejected it. This church belonged to something older. Gianni greeted him with a nod. No small talk, no smile. He led Healy through the nave, their footsteps loud in the silence. "We'll begin the renewal at dusk. It's safer then, more quiet." Healy didn't ask why. Instead, he said, "You said no one stays. Why is that?" Gianni was silent for a moment. Then, "Because once you see him, you'll know you don't belong here." They passed into the sacristy, and from there down. The staircase behind the altar was hidden behind a wooden confessional that hadn't been used in decades. Gianni moved it aside like it weighed nothing, revealing a narrow stone spiral descending into the dark. "No electricity down there. It brings interference. The entity doesn't like it." Healy lit his lantern. Gianni did the same. They stepped into the earth. The stairs went down further than they should have. Healy counted 4 landings, then 5, each colder than the last. The walls were lined with etchings, symbols from the journal drawn in ash and bone, crosses turned sideways, circles within squares, words scrawled backward in languages older than scripture. Gianni said nothing as they descended. Healy's breathing slowed. The air pressed in on him like water. At the 6th landing, the passage leveled out into a narrow hall flanked by rusted iron sconces and ancient brickwork. They reached the door. It was iron, twice the height of a man, and etched with more of the same symbols. 7 locks across its surface. Gianni began unlocking them one by one. His fingers moved with practiced reverence. Healy's stomach tightened. The final lock clicked. Gianni didn't open the door. Instead, he turned to Healy. "You speak to him only if he speaks to you, and then choose your words. Don't offer your name, don't talk about time, and don't ask about God." Healy nodded. Gianni opened the door. The room beyond was a cell only in the loosest sense. A stone box 30 feet square. The floor was bare cement, marked in thick white chalk lines that formed a kind of cage within the room. At its center, bound in shackles and bolted to the floor and embedded in his wrists and ankles, was Alessandro Volpe. He was barefoot, shirtless, thin but not starved, muscular but not too strong. His skin was a pallid gray, eyes closed. Black hair hung over his face, a beard like moss. He looked like a man halfway between life and fossil. He didn't move. Gianni stepped forward and placed a small wooden bowl at the edge of the chalk lines. It contained water, bread, and something else. Something black and glossy like a stone. Healy stepped beside him. The lantern light flickered as if afraid. Alessandro opened his eyes. They were gray. Not the cloudy gray of the blind, but flat like slate under ice. There was no malice in them, no rage. Just stillness. "You're early," Alessandro said. Gianni tensed beside Healy. "I thought the binding was at dusk. Did I forget the sun?" Healy stepped forward, unsure of what he expected. This man, this thing, was nothing like what he had faced before. It was too calm. "You've read the journal," Alessandro said, though no one had told him. Healy didn't respond. "You should be careful with that." Healy found his voice. "What are you?" Alessandro tilted his head. "What are you?" Alessandro echoed. "You were human once." "I was something once. A vessel, a memory, a god forgotten and left for dead. Gianni stepped between them. "That's enough." Alessandro smiled. It wasn't cruel, it was tired. They began the binding ritual. Gianni led the rite. Chalk was redrawn, candles placed, symbols re-etched. Alessandro sat quietly through all of it. At one point he hummed a lullaby, an old Sicilian tune Healy hadn't heard since childhood. His mother used to sing it. By the end, the air in the room felt solid. The ritual completed, the last line spoken. Gianni stepped back, exhausted. "It's done." Alessandro looked up at Healy and said, "Is it?" They returned to the rectory. Gianni poured 2 glasses of something dark and strong and didn't bother with a toast. "You've done what you came for. You assisted me in the binding ritual, and you're welcome to rest a few days before you go." Healy nodded. "Thanks." "Not many accept. Most leave the next morning." Healy sipped the drink. It burned, but it was clean. "I'll stay, for now." That night, Healy lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The journal rested on the desk. The words ran in his head like a virus. Not a demon, a door. A fracture in the spine of reality. What disturbed him wasn't exactly just Alessandro. It was how much peace the man seemed to have. He had exorcised hundreds. Most howled, screamed, pleaded, fought. But Alessandro, he waited. The next morning, the sun rose but cast no warmth. It hovered low and bloodless in the sky, as if unsure of its place. Healy sat alone at the stone table in the rectory garden, a cup of black coffee cooling in his hands. Father Gianni had left for early morning mass, his footsteps fading into the silence of the village. Healy hadn't slept. The image of Alessandro, calm and smiling in that cold pit of stone, had wormed its way into Healy's thoughts and nested there. He had seen every kind of possession. And Healy couldn't stop thinking about the lie at the core of the Vatican's instructions. If the Church truly believed in mercy, if it believed in the soul, how could it let a man live like that for 30 years, shackled, starved, and buried? He downed the coffee. It was cold and bitter. His decision was already made. He went inside and began preparing for the exorcism. He told Gianni nothing. He waited until the sun touched the edge of the hills and the shadows grew long in the nave. Then he took the key, 7 locks, just like before. He moved through the spiral stairs like a man going to his own funeral. The closer he got to the chamber, the more wrong the air felt. The chalk symbols on the walls seemed to shimmer as he passed. At the door, he hesitated, just for a breath. Then he unlocked the final seal and stepped inside. Alessandro was shackled to the table as always. His eyes opened before Healy spoke. "You're not supposed to be here." I'm here to free the man inside you." Alessandro blinked. "No one has ever been able to." Healy set the lantern down, lit the candles, and opened his Bible. Even though the words looked wrong now, curled and misshapen, he read them, forced them into the air. Alessandro didn't resist. In fact, he looked grateful. He pressed the crucifix to Alessandro's chest and began the rite. The air turned heavy. The candles guttered. The chains holding Alessandro began to rattle. Healy's voice rose. Sweat ran down his spine, and something inside the stone walls began to groan. Then Alessandro's head tilted back, and he began to sing. The candles went out. The crucifix in his hand shattered, and Alessandro smiled. The binding snapped like twine. Chains tore loose from the stone with a screech that shook the chamber. Alessandro rose. Not violently, not demonically, he simply stood up. Blood began to seep from the ceiling, not dripping, but reversing, flowing upward into cracks that formed like veins. The symbols on the walls burned away. Healy staggered back. Then the screaming started. Not from Alessandro, from nowhere. From the walls, from the air. A sound like every scream he had ever heard, layered into one single impossible noise. The floor split down the center, and a gust of heat blasted upward, thick and choking. Healy fell to one knee, coughing, eyes burning. He looked up and saw Alessandro's body collapse. Limp, empty. Something left him, but it didn't go far. A shape began to rise. Not visible, but implied. A distortion in the air. A ripple in reality itself. The torches on the walls blew out. All of them, and the stone glowed faintly with a color that didn't exist. The light was wrong, and in that void, Healy felt it. And it saw him. And Healy ran. Up the stairs, through the halls. Behind him, the sound of splitting, as though the world itself were tearing like fabric. Symbols on the walls burst into flame as he passed. The air pulsed, his chest hurt, blood trickled from his ears. His thoughts bent sideways. He reached the nave and threw open the doors. And he stepped into hell. The sky was black. Not night black, but black as if the heavens had been ripped out and replaced with a lid. People stood in the street staring upward, mouths open, unmoving. Birds littered the cobblestones, their bodies twisted. The bell in the tower swung without sound. Father Gianni lay on the floor of the church, twitching. His eyes were gone, torn out. Healy staggered past him into the open air. In the center of the plaza, the well was bubbling. Not with water, but with lightless mist. It poured upward, coiling like smoke, thickening and forming limbs. The shape was emerging, slowly. It had no eyes, no face. Just an outline of something that shouldn't be. And Healy finally understood. This wasn't a demon, this wasn't a curse. It was a seed, planted in Alessandro, grown with decades of faith and fear and containment. And he, Father Healy, had harvested it. He ran to the rectory, locked the door, and barricaded it with everything he could find. He found the journal and began to write. To whoever reads this, I'm sorry. I broke the seal. I didn't understand. Alessandro's vessel was holding this long dead god captive, and I let it out. I took the lid off of the coffin. Do not follow, do not seek him, do not listen to the voice that says it wants out. Please. If anyone finds this, if reality even continues to exist, forgive me. He placed the book in the drawer, locked it, and waited. And outside, the world and the very fabric of reality began to forget the shape of itself.